You're listening to Monocle on Saturday, first broadcast on the 1st of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, broadcasting to you from Midori House in London. Welcome to Monocle on Saturday. On today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the international broadcast correspondent, former CNN Europe editor Nina dos Santos. Welcome, Nina. Good to have you with us. What have you spotted?
Thanks very much, Emma. Well, I suppose the thing we really have to talk about, that everybody's talking about, is Zelensky's treatment in the Oval Office by Donald Trump and the Vice President J.D. Vance. It made me think over my 25-year career as a journalist whether or not anybody's ever spoken like that in front of me in a meeting. And I've got to say, even in the world of journalism, I don't think I've ever seen such strong scenes.
Indeed. Then,
I'm into the final stretch of my literary adventure, and this past week has been spent on the island of Bali, that, although it's classified as Indonesia, is really almost a separate entity.
more from Georgina Godwin, still on her travels, in a little while. We'll also hear from Karen Krizanovich and Fernando Augusto Pacheco as they get themselves ready for the Oscars. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson. First, though, a look at the headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been told to leave the White House early after he clashed with Donald Trump at the start of their meeting at the Oval Office. The signing of a deal to give the US access to Ukraine's mineral resources was cancelled. During the dramatic exchanges, Mr. Trump told Mr. Zelensky he was disrespectful and accused him of gambling with the Third World War. The British Prime Minister will hold talks with President Zelensky and Italy's Giorgia Meloni in Downing Street tomorrow before a major London defence summit aimed at securing lasting and enforced peace in Ukraine. Fresh from his trip to see Donald Trump in the White House, more than a dozen world leaders will gather to discuss Ukraine with Mr. Starmer. And Pope Francis has had an isolated breathing crisis in hospital, the Vatican has said. It's led to a sudden worsening of his respiratory condition. The 88-year-old pontiff has been battling pneumonia for 2 weeks. The Vatican now says he's receiving gas through a face mask to help him breathe. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. And a very warm welcome to the studio, Nina dos Santos. How are you, Nina? It is so good to see you.
I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, delighted to be back. I haven't been on this programme for about a month.
It's lovely. It's
nice
lovely
to be back with you.
And we so what's been going on in the Dos Santos world? What's the last week brought to you? Hopefully better fortunes than Volodymyr Zelensky, who's got an absolute thumping yesterday. We'll come to that in
a lot
minute.
of talking about that on US TV. I think it's been very interesting seeing world leaders, particularly European significant world leaders like Emmanuel Macron and also Keir Starmer, have this pilgrimage to kiss the ring of Donald Trump, who increasingly is behaving less and less like a US president, but more sort of as an imperial power here. And obviously it's culminated with this extremely tense and disappointing treatment of Volodymyr Zelensky. Again, it seemed at one point during Keir Starmer's press conference with Donald Trump, and by the way, Keir Starmer's received massive plaudits here in the UK for his deft handling of a very firebrand, further right-wing Republican president than any other Labour leader like Tony Blair would have had to deal with back in the day. He appears to have been able to sort of mollify Donald Trump quite a bit. But now we've had these really unpleasant scenes with Volodymyr Zelensky. I think that'll sort of strike terror into the hearts of many a European leader.
It's for those of us who might not have seen the video. What happened yesterday was that Volodymyr Zelensky sat in the Oval Office ahead of what was supposed to be a long discussion, during which he was supposed to sign, alongside Donald Trump, a deal to allow the US access to vital minerals that come from Ukraine's soil. They had a 50-minute press conference, 40 minutes of which was perfectly civil. And then it came to the issue of Ukraine and Russia, and the wheels firmly came off, with Donald Trump berating Volodymyr Zelensky for not saying thank you to him for America saving him, for effectively realising that he's in a bad way and needs America, and should effectively, without saying it in so many words, capitulate to Russia.
And I couldn't put it better myself.
We also didn't have anything like a sort of a balanced conversation either, because the Vice President J.D. Vance was in the room. And it just looked like two boys, bullies, in a playground, ganging up on the little guy. And that's the only way I could read that dynamic. But it's probably an awful lot more complicated than that, isn't it?
Well, obviously, the fate of Ukraine is tied up with the fate of Western security, the fate of NATO, even though Ukraine isn't a member of NATO, and that's obviously what Vladimir Zelensky wants, and people like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump say that's completely unreasonable, take it off the table. Russia, of course, is staunchly against any security guarantees that America could give as part of this peace deal, and that's one of the bones of contention that Zelensky was trying to raise. He was more or less saying in that press conference, imagine the situation we're in. It could happen to you if you, allow our country to be used to set such a dangerous precedent. But the moment he said that, the atomic bomb went off, it appears, inside the Oval Office. Donald Trump accused him of gambling with millions of people's lives, again, pushing this narrative that Ukraine is to blame, that he will be to blame if more people lose their lives because Ukraine tries to fight for its independence and its sovereignty. And then J.D. Vance piled in and said, as you were just saying before, did you ever say thank you once in this meeting? Well, I went and looked at the tape 2 or 3 times. And about 7 minutes into the tape, before all this happened, Vladimir Zelensky had said thank you. So you get the feeling that this was an orchestrated ambush to deliberately discredit Vladimir Zelensky after, of course, all of those comments that Donald Trump had made last week, calling him a dictator. So the question is will they pile on now as he's gone back to Kyiv empty-handed?
There is when I was watching it, I just keep remembering that he was he was a presenter on The Apprentice. He was, he was it. And I mean, I think an article in the Times today, Roger Mosey just weighed in and said, actually, we watched an episode of The Apprentice last night. Volodymyr Zelensky was fired, and we even saw him get in the car at the end. Another bit of me wondered, as I watched it, that this felt so surreal, that you had the Oval Office being used for a fight, when actually, if you are going to have a fight, you have it behind closed doors. You don't do it in the Oval. You don't do it in a place which is, the office itself is the important thing here.
Which is ironic, by the way, because one of the reasons that Donald Trump appears to have gone apoplectic is because he said, you are disrespecting this office. You are disrespecting the office of the President of the United States. To come here and make demands inside the Oval Office is disrespecting. But I think many people watching from the outside will think that, as you just pointed out, behaving like you're a version of the TV series The Apprentice with another democratically elected world leader whose country has suffered hugely during war and is still at war is pretty disrespectful in itself.
I know, it's right. It's a Roger Boy's article in the Times here saying the US president set a trap in the White House and his Ukrainian counterpart walked straight into it. There was a sense that it was a sort of trapped beast here, wasn't it? But also the sense that perhaps if we are going to try and frame this from the way that Donald Trump operates as a TV show host, if we just sort of try and set the importance of his office to one side, is he setting up for a resolution where he is going to solve the problem?
I don't know. That would follow logic. It's an astute observation, but I would point out that I'm not sure how much of this strategic chaos follows logic or whether it's just designed to create strategic chaos. This idea that, Donald Trump can be quite combative, throwing the first punch, and then starts negotiating when somebody's sort of staggering to gain their balance again. If that is the case, this was one heck of an example of it, with, very ugly ramifications for how international relations themselves are conducted between Western allies. That's the real fundamental problem here. As I said, I suspect this could be the preamble for really definitely trying to discredit Vladimir Zelensky's government. They've already started to talk in Washington, in the White House, publicly about how there haven't been elections for a while, quote unquote, there's this democratic deficit. And we know that just before the start of the invasion of Russia, of Ukraine by Russia, Russia had tried to install a puppet government, according to some intelligence from the UK, probably also with the US as well, that intelligence. And so this potentially could be a preamble to that. That's, I think, what's really concerning.
And the Financial Times this morning is talking about how that the I think the argument is being made that. But I think it's the New York Times this morning. Let's have a look at it. Talking about how actually that the real point of this is that Donald Trump wants to reestablish normal relationships with Russia. This is the way that we go, because there are business opportunities to be had with Russia, and also because big strong man likes to cozy up to another big strong man.
I think that's exactly it. And I think, Donald Trump is looking at this from a business perspective as a business person. Remember that America now is a big, much bigger than it was in oil, and is able to export its oil, whereas, 10 years ago it wasn't. And so essentially it's a big commodities producer. He wants to drill more for oil. Russia and America had this famous meeting in Saudi Arabia, another oil-producing country, to talk about the fate of Ukraine without Ukraine and Europe on the table. And so I think what you've got is three big commodities economies, two of which are not democratic countries, just basically tying up the world in terms of sort of its mineral and petrol reserves. Because they are big players in the oil market. And let's face it, the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore, but essentially, commodities like oil.
You wanted to mention the idea of us having been in bad meetings.
Yeah. Well, when I looked at this,
I don't know I'd ever been in a meeting like that. Well, I probably have, but I probably would be indiscreet for me to mention it. But there's this wonderful case that the Times is mentioning about Nikita Khrushchev. Her grandfather, the incident of the shoe. All her life she's been, it's her grandfather's famous display of anger at the United Nations. So Khrushchev's at the UN and no one's listening to him. So what does he do? He gets his shoe out and he bangs it on the table. And it suddenly gives that idea that you have decorum, you have the office, you have goodness knows what. But actually, sometimes the mask does slip and you end up just, well, I don't know if I've ever banged a shoe on a table to try and get attention, but just the fact that suddenly when the diplomatic guard goes down, suddenly everything just becomes exposed, doesn't it? Which is what we saw yesterday in Washington.
And I think, the example of the Khrushchev shoe, or giving people the boot, so to speak, I suppose you might call it, the UN, would have been, again, deliberately orchestrated for countries that find that very offensive, because we know there's some countries in Asia and the Middle East where actually, throwing a shoe at somebody is one of the biggest forms of offence that you can do. And I suppose that's the question I have with regards to this ambush in the Oval Office was this orchestrated? And let's face it, Donald Trump is a democratically elected president. He's quite different to other democratically elected presidents that perhaps valued the sense of decorum a bit more. And J.D. Vance as well, democratically elected. I just can't understand why they feel the need to behave like this, because, you and I are not important democratically elected people, but we would know that
the world is very glad about that.
If we behaved like that, we would probably be thinking, oh God, what did that achieve? What was my strategic objective? And I just can't see, when the stakes are so high and you're the supposed leader of the free world, quote unquote, why you do that unless you had an objective. Now, it's quite interesting because Kaja Kallas, who's the former Estonian Prime Minister, who's now the chief diplomat for the European Union, tweeted in the last few hours after this saying, it looks like the leader of the free world needs a new leader. Obviously, pointing the finger at a resurgent Europe that's obviously going to go head-to-head with Donald Trump on trade and have to make itself more independent from the United States from a security point of view straight away. But, we have had these tense meetings, haven't we, in our times, particularly in the news industry, where, you're buffeted by the winds of change all the time. People, have lots of responsibility to make snap decisions that can get quite stressful. The only time I've ever heard of something like this happening was my previous boss, who's about 10, 15 years older than me, saying that the previous head of a bureau I used to work in for a few years in a European country threw something at her computer screen because he didn't like her article over her shoulder, and it smashed it back in the day. And I remember thinking, my gosh, I hope nobody's ever going to do anything like that in my term. And no, I've seen shouting, but I've never actually seen anything like that.
I've seen a typewriter fly across a room.
Goodness me.
I have.
Who did it hit?
It was in a newsroom. A very long, shows you how old I am, that they had typewriters. It didn't hit anybody, but it was a news editor who was quite cross. And he picked up a typewriter and he flung it across the room.
And what were the ramifications of that?
I don't think anybody ever got told that because it went very quiet for a very, very long time. But you get proper, not necessarily fights, but you do get sort of like chest to chest.
Yeah.
But dare I say it's not normally a woman who picks up a typewriter.
And this is what really concerns me about the administration in the United States. The repealing of all the diversity and inclusion initiatives, lots of companies and all sorts of organisations folding on these programmes mean that we'll have less diverse voices in the room to sort of temper this type of macho behaviour.
The one we do have now, and this is being widely reported, I think there's an article by Fraser Nelson as well in the Times today, talking about what Sir Keir Starmer's job is now. And not necessarily, look, with no disrespect to Sir Keir, not the most charismatic out there sort of external character. And yet he now becomes the link between Donald Trump and Europe, which is so ironic given what happened with Brexit. But the fact remains is that everybody is now coming to London this week. Zelensky's on his way. Giorgia Meloni's here. There's going to be a major defence meeting that's happening at the start of next week. It was intended to talk about Ukraine. It will take a brand new dynamic here. But the fact remains is it's now London that all eyes are on.
It is, except there's some irritation, particularly among the countries in the Baltics who are really concerned that Vladimir Putin could go for them next if there's a botched peace deal in Ukraine. They haven't been invited to this big meeting that's taking place with no fewer than 18 of these important European countries. Obviously, the UK has been able to deftly, for quite some time, pitch itself as a country that wants to get back in with Europe and is a valuable ally because of our big defence manufacturing capability and, our strengths in defence. And also we can provide a counterweight to a French nuclear umbrella so that Germany is the new incoming chancellor there. Friedrich Merz has suggested Germany and continental Europe could be protected by this umbrella of nuclear weapons coming from the UK, nuclearised submarines and sort of other nuclear shields from France. But the reality is that Keir Starmer's in a really awkward position here because there he's been in, kissing the ring of the emperor, so to speak, in Washington, albeit in a very wooden fashion. He looked terribly uncomfortable, I must say, during that press conference when one of the US reporters asked him about the irony of extending a state visit by the king to Donald Trump at a time when Donald Trump's trying to take over one of his realms, Canada. And then Keir Starmer, I don't know whether you saw this, was trying to answer the question, then Donald Trump completely shut him up. So Keir Starmer's facing some awkward questions here in the UK, saying, well, are you going to defend Volodymyr Zelensky as an elected representative of his country at this meeting?
Indeed. Let's talk about other kinds of kissing. This is a bit of a strange jump, but this is a story that you wanted to draw our attention to when you talked about kissing and sort of getting too close to people. A poor woman in her 50s has found herself in major trouble for kissing a pop star. But not any kind of pop star and in not any kind of circumstances. This is a good story. Thank you for bringing this in, Nina.
Well, this is in a couple of the newspapers today. People listening may be familiar with BTS, which is obviously the huge Korean
Listen to Monocle Radio enough and you will. It's quite a lot of them. They're brilliant.
And one of many of the successful K-pop bands, but this is probably the biggest sort of boy band, isn't it? And one of its key artists, Kim Seok-jin, has just completed his 18 months of national service. Now, I remember when being here on Monocle Radio about 18 months ago talking about this and how fans were distraught that they wouldn't see him for quite some time because he was going to go and do his national service and people were crying sort of outside the barracks. Well, now he's finished finished with that, he decided to celebrate on his first day as a civilian by hosting a hugathon, inviting 1,000 fans to come and get a free hug in a stadium.
Cuddle with Kim.
A cuddle with Kim.
Nice.
But a few of them got a little bit too exuberant. And there's pictures of a few of them pecking him on the cheek. And he actually looks rather pained by it, I must say. But for some reason, a Japanese woman apparently potentially might have taken things a bit too far. She's in her 50s and she was called in for questioning by the police on suspicion of potentially, I suppose the allegation here is sexual harassment.
But she wasn't going in for a full mouth encounter.
No, it was just on the cheek.
And I was just thinking, actually, if you are a 50-year-old woman and you see sort of, there's a kind of, I'm trying not to sort of cast massive aspersions, but a kiss from a 50-year-old woman could actually have a slightly maternal tone to it.
Yes, because he's 32.
He's 32. Right. And it might have just been purely instinctive, but we don't know the circumstances of all this.
No, we don't. But I think. Remember, it doesn't look, from what I read in an article, again, in the Times, actually, which is highly represented on this show. We've got to stop that. That he would have, complained about it. They have a system in South Korea, as many countries have, where people can report allegations of crimes that they think police should investigate. And, some of these fans are such dedicated fans that somebody who was another fan, reported this. I suppose the issue here is that this Japanese woman actually posted on Facebook, that she had kissed him on the cheek, and that was in violation of the original invitation. It was said, you can come, you can get a hug from the star, but you can't kiss him. And she went ahead and kissed him. And this is the great quote in the article in the Times. It said, and his cheek was so soft.
Her lips had touched Jin's soft skin, which actually then opens a whole thing about skincare.
Oh, our Korean skincare, we could be here forever.
Amazing.
Right?
We could be here for absolutely days. So maybe the lady was just trying to see what kind of serum he was using. I feel an awful lot of sympathy for absolutely everybody involved in here. Because let's go from Kim's point of view. Massive megastar, then has 18 months in the army. I don't know how I would feel if I'd been in that sort of highly regimented place, then sort of saying to 1,000 people, come and give me a cuddle, because that might be quite overwhelming.
I think so, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And then one poor woman comes along and touches Jin's soft skin.
Actually, I think there might have been more than one, because when I was looking at the pictures of this, there seemed to be more than one woman kissing him on the cheek. And as I said, he looked quite sort of anxious about it. And apparently he said at some point, don't attack me, to fans as they got a bit too exuberant. But look, it speaks to the celebrity culture in South Korea that has a very dark side and is quite damaging. There was obviously an actress, Kim Se-rong, who killed herself recently after she was dropped by her agency and ended up having to make ends meet by waitressing in a bar, and that was all surrounding the fact that she got caught drink driving at one point. And then, of course, there's other K-pop stars who've had to apologise for having boyfriends. So, there's an issue perhaps with celebrity culture in South Korea, and the fact that, you have these massive fan bases.
You're listening to Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson, joined in the studio by Nina dos Santos. Georgina Godwin is still on her travels, ladies and gentlemen. She is having the time of her life and we are absolutely delighted about it. Here she is with her latest letter.
Dear Emma and all our Monocle Radio crew and listeners, I'm into the final stretch of my literary adventure, and this past week has been spent on the island of Bali that, although it's classified as Indonesia, is really almost a separate entity. Indonesia has 17,000 different islands, so it feels like a deeply spiritual place, and each family has their own temple, each community at least 3, and offerings are made to the gods daily. This Hindu faith is deeply connected to art, and the temples are full of intricate carvings which are to be seen everywhere. It's said that everyone in Bali, particularly Ubud, is an artist, and it's not hard to believe. Not everyone is a singer, however. Bali appears to be the centre of what I believe is termed yacht rock, soft, recognisable ballads that blend into the background. The main streets are all lined with restaurants, bars and cafes, most with their own in-house band. And it's possible to walk along the road being simultaneously serenaded by Fly Me to the Moon, Arthur's Theme, Your Song, Rainy Days and Mondays, and Imagine, all at once. Also, gamelan chimes, which are charming. But our hotel has gone a little overboard on them. The recording begins at 7 a.m. and it's clearly audible in the room until it ends at midnight. We're here as part of the Ubud Writers' Festival. The main event takes place in October, but my brother, the writer Peter Godwin, and I have been conducting masterclasses and in-conversation events. The festival is run by Melbourne-born Janet Deneve, who married an Indonesian and has lived in Bali for decades. She also runs the charming Honeymoon Guest House and 3 separate restaurants, as well as the annual Bali Food Festival. She's an author, and her book Fragrant Rice tells the story of her life on the island through the recipes she loves to cook. And she'll be in an upcoming episode of Meet the Writers very soon. There have been torrential downpours every afternoon while we've been here, but then the sky clears in time for another stunning sunset. I've documented much of that on my Instagram account at Georgina C. Godwin. We ventured down the coast to the surfers' paradise of Bingin Beach and the Beach House by Ours, a restaurant and hotel that's at the end of a winding passageway and a very, very steep staircase. Michelin star chef Wes Witzel has invited us to sample his cooking, and overindulging was not an issue as the extra calories were wiped out by the mega climb back up. My thighs are still feeling it. But Bali has a solution for that. Apart from amazing art and delicious food, the island's known for massages. So much choice everywhere. The standard is generally as good as one would find at the top international spas, but at a fraction of the cost. So, I'm going to go and have one more relaxing Balinese foot treatment, and then head to Adelaide for Writers' Week. So, I'll be back to tell you all about Australia next Saturday. With love, wherever you are in the world.
Oh, Georgina, we don't want it to end for you because you're having such a glorious time, although I hope your thighs are better. That was Georgina Godwin in Indonesia. Next week, she'll be in Australia, and then in a little while, she'll be back in London, and we'll be very happy to see her. Nina dos Santos in the studio with me. Hello again. Let's talk about oil. Do you want to talk about wine? Do we want to talk about Skype? There's loads of things that are sort of knocking around the papers today, which are all pretty interesting. It's not been quite dominated by the Trump-Zelensky punch-up.
I don't think I've ever been on Skype under the influence of wine. Although when my parents-in-law were introduced to Skype, I must say I was tempted because they got so enthusiastic they started using it all the time. My poor mother, who is a committed technophobe, cannot understand that one, can barely use an iPhone. So, you know, she's never been tempted to use Skype. But it is sad to hear that Microsoft, after buying it in 2011 for $8.5 billion, is now shuttering Skype because it seems it doesn't make enough money. And I suppose what they're trying to do is boost Microsoft Teams.
There's the associated problem that the first time that we heard of this, anybody in broadcasting just went, oh, yeah. It's used. There are widespread uses of it, and it makes you realise that pockets of industry and pockets of the world will be devastated by this.
Yeah, particularly in the emerging markets, I think, as well, where, some of the other softwares that are available, either aren't as secure or, for instance, they use too much bandwidth. Skype was so reliable. And also, as you were just saying before, particularly as you do radio, I'm a TV person, I do a lot of TV, and Skype is excellent for that. I do Italian TV via Skype. You can record a clip. It's great quality. I just don't understand it. But I suppose the reality is, in today's age of immediacy, when people are using WhatsApp phone calls more often, they just can't compete, maybe.
It is one of those things that will be consigned. There'll be a thing in about 2 or 3 years' time when someone will look blankly at you when you say Skype.
Oh,
and
God.
They'll just look at you as if you're old because you understand.
You mean a bit like a dial-up phone?
Yes. Or like lots
like a landline.
Lots of things. So many things. All you need to do is get
a VHS tape.
A ewer?
A what?
Exactly. A ewer is boring. It's not. It was wonderful. It was a standard recording equipment from a very, very long time ago when you first started out in broadcasting. People now record everything on the phones. In the olden days, you used to take a tape and used to edit it with a razor blade and a Chinograph pencil.
But what is quite nice about coming here to Monocle Radio is the slightly retro vibe. The sort of idea that quality is the important thing and that it's meant to last.
Yes.
I think it's great to see that there are some people who still champion those values.
Yes, and long we shall. Let's talk about the Oscars, because it's tomorrow night. Karen Krizanovich, the film critic and regular around the table, sat down with Fernando Augusto Pacheco in the studio to talk about the best films of the year and their dramatic Oscar campaigns. And Faye began by asking Karen whether she thought that last year had been a very good, if not vintage year for film.
It's difficult to say what a vintage year is because it's only when we get 10 or 20 years down the line can we look back and have that opinion. Right now, I think it's the best year we could have had, considering we've had strikes, writer strikes, and other things. We're still recovering from COVID, believe it or not, the industry. And I think there's enough variety here for everybody to be happy. There's something for young people or old people and people who don't usually go to the cinema, and some people want to see something sexy, and some who want to see science fiction, and some who want to see some international, something that's not in the English language, and even something with a little body horror.
And we're talking, of course, about the substance.
Yes, we are. Which actually, I took a friend who is very conservative in what he likes to see. It's science fiction, robots, and that's it. Loved it. Really loved it. So it's one of these things, and the cinema always expands our minds. If you go buy a ticket, you might not like it, but you might surprise yourself. And I think the substance fits in that category.
One thing we must talk is about the dirty campaigns. I mean, this year we had people talking about the brutalist usage of AI. Some people are talking about Honora. They didn't have an intimacy coordinator. Carla Sofia Gascon, of course, and her tweets. I mean, what a year as well for drama.
It's great to have some drama. I mean, last year we just had a drama about somebody marketing their film wrong. Ooh, you didn't follow the protocol. That's a bit boring. But this year we have really proper discussions and proper scandals that illuminate the issues that are going on in the film industry itself. The use of AI and all sorts of other things, and attitudes to sexuality or gender or politics, and
even cancel culture in a way as well.
No, completely cancel culture. That's really under the microscope now, and it will be even more next year. So I think that these are, if you're going to have controversy, these are the right kind of ones to have, because they do start people talking, and that's what we like.
Is there room for surprise in the Oscars? And I ask this because we have so many awards. We have the Golden Globes, the BAFTAs, even Cannes, because Cannes is becoming very important in terms of the films nominated here. And Venice as well. Is there room for surprise? Is the Oscar voter sometimes they think differently than their European counterparts?
The Oscar voters are an animal unto themselves. You think you know what they're going to vote. I think sometimes the Oscars get it right, meaning they pick who I think should win. I think we all feel that way. I think we feel all very, very personal that if we were Oscar voters, it would just be great films picked all the time. And it's not always, because, like the BAFTAs and all other, the Césars, everything, it is a local award. And it's voted on by people who live locally, although that is changing with the influx of more international people into the voters. And you know that the Golden Globes have a lot of Brazilian voters now.
They do.
They do.
And that's why Fernanda Torres won there for Best Actress. But it's funny that some people might imagine the Oscar voter as someone a bit, a bit older.
Yeah.
And a bit. But I don't know, Karen, about you, because comparing to the BAFTAs or something, there's something quite fresh about the nominations. I think they're taking more risks than perhaps the cliche of the Oscar voter.
I think this year it's not your mama's Oscar ballot. This is the ballot of people who care about the industry, care about the profile of the industry. And like Sean Baker, for example, he wants to get people into the cinema, not just streaming, but the big screen, the experience. And I think a new generation is really taking that on board as they move up the ladder of being more establishment. So I think the Oscars are getting better and better as far as their scope and their inclusion and I think also their imagination about what they like. I mean, for example, Flow. I mean, Flow did very well, which is a Latvian animation film. You think, wow, can it get more obscure? But it's wonderful.
And that was Karen Krizanovich talking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco about the Oscars. Karen will be in the studio with me for The Globalist from 7 a.m. London time to go through the night's events. So stay tuned for that. What's on the cards for you, Nina dos Santos, this week?
I am off to the Mobile World Congress for Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday to go and interview a couple of big tech rich people. But they're not. But they're not part of the Silicon Valley broligarchy that's very close to the White House. So I suspect they might have some rather rare and dissenting views in that world.
Broligarchy is a word I have not heard on Monocle before, and I shall steal it. Thank you so much. Nina dos Santos joining me in the studio. That's all the time we have for today's programme. Thanks to Nina, and also thanks to all my guests and the producers Desiree Bandley and Mariella Bevan. Our studio engineer was Mariella Bevan as well. A warm welcome back to her. Monocle on Saturday is back next weekend. I'm here with Monocle on Sunday. It's coming live from Zurich, though. Tyler's in charge tomorrow. But for now, have a good weekend.